Are you ready, kids?
I'm a simple man, and I have a simple request. Can these things please have more maps in them? I swear, okay, you boot up Skyrim and you hear a bunch of this junk. Where? I don't know where any of this is. I don't know where we are. You remember when you're a kid reading through Lord of the Rings and the first thing you see after the copyright pages, but before page 1 was a map? I guess we don't really know what you got until it's gone. I remember playing Morrowind and how much more sense everything instantly made as soon as I saw this image online, outside of the game where having something like that handy would have helped out the most. And thus we begin a review of Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, which, just like the first game, has characters speaking in walls of text so deeply submerged in their own jargon that, well, they might as well not be speaking English.
Been more than a middling life worth since my flails got bathed in bloody gore.
Long and last. Is a right fine pleasure jawing with someone who cons proper prose.
Same to you, my noble sir. 'Tis rare and seendal for a kinsman to cross my brood these undead days.
Having a map sure would help during many of these conversations, especially since the game's developers and its own setting are happy to remind you that all the continental forest and meadows of the previous game don't count anymore, for the much more nautical world map we're tackling now. The developers made the imaginative decision to cover most of the Pillar's planet in water, and this game has us exploring a region that's an archipelago, rather than one of the solid continents. So, how did we get there? Oh no! The god Aethys has possessed the Ingwithan Aedra Titan of Ad-Nua, destroying Cad-Nua and leaving you in search for answers as he rampages into the Deadfire archipelago. Leaving you in search for answers as he rampages into the Deadfire archipelago, leaving a wake of destruction behind. As a watcher, you are bound by the gods to confront Aethys and set things right and... well, exactly! Aethys caused to be... what? How was This is the line that broke me. Somehow, this line made sense to someone out there in the world. Pillars was always the most indulgent lore whore to come peddling an unforgettable world-building session outside of those AAA tarts. And what was so thrilling about seeing the first game knock a 20-year-old bar for quality right out of the park in 2015 was that it was also kind of an underdog success story. Crowdfunding a 2D game that looks like it's from the late 90s where the player's primary skill being tested was reading comprehension? Since then, what else has come out? There's Divinity 2, Numenera, Tyranny, Age of Decadence. The CRPG genre isn't exactly exploding, but it has definitely been doing a kind of renaissance. And before Divinity Original Sin preceded the Kickstarter successes of Wasteland 2 and Pillars, we had been enduring a drought. But playing the first Pillars game next to the second will show you that things really are a bit rougher around the edges this time. After playing a nobody who stumbles into an increasingly strange quest, Pillars 2 instead begins with mystical chosen one magic and abstraction straight from the get-go, building on one game with 2 expansions worth of lore that throws us straight into this dumb-as-hell first act where a boring protagonist is chasing after a boring antagonist while the player is left without an idea why, nor even the hope that you're even gonna be able to land a scratch on this guy. This is a CRPG, remember? The likelihood of using your accumulated skills to just talk down this thing at the end of the game is pretty much winked at you by the genre helmed by these developers, which makes it weird to say that Pillars 2 is still a grand old reactive as hell Obsidian RPG as good as the rest of them. It looks like they're just sauntering onwards with a bit of exhaustion in their steps for now. That lack of an opening hook is a real shame, and it's also the means by which I make my case. More often than not, it's charm that sucks me into a good RPG. The lengthy time and slow burning world building afforded by walking and talking, rather than bashing and smashing, means that feeling truly invested in the world building aspects of a role-playing game only get me so far as me being immersed in the world in the first place. And suspending my disbelief over this onslaught of initial exposition of a genuinely mispaced intro was rough. You'll spend so many hours watching your weak protagonist chase this weak villain, and both of you are steeped in more abstraction than you are archetypes, despite the oppressively archetypical setting that Pillars takes place in. The first might have been all wordy Tolkien, but it was also genuinely funny. It started off on that note. The hook that got me was laugh-out-loud humor hitting the mark about an hour in. It was also genuinely insightful, with unsettling suggestions to make about life, death, faith, and religion, all that pseudo-intellectual multiplanar philosophy that Obsidian always loves to brain up their Tolkien with. But to be honest, I'm not exactly exactly surprised the writing is tarnished. When Obsidian's best writer, if not the best writer in the whole industry, decided to quit the company in 2015 because of alleged mismanagement with their benefits, regardless of what happened, Avalon's departure has left a mark on this game. You can tell he's gone, in the beginning and also towards the ending, when they're still trying like hell, without a Chris Avalon on staff, to still throw in some writing that'll blow your mind with some reactive text that'll blow your mind, and you can tell he's not there for it this time. Reactive text now has voiced NPCs suddenly change their mood and tone mid-conversation.
Thank Andra's sweet tides. Forgive me, stranger, but you must help us. If you could, I mean. Who are you? A buyer, maybe? But down here?
Adair's character is weirdly inconsistent. At times, he's this insightful, well-spoken sage source of common wisdom. During other times, he's barely able to string together sentences. But a less perfect Pillars still means that a classic Infinity Engine story all about getting weird and philosophical and funny is gonna happen eventually. It just, doesn't really pick up until Act 3 this time. Until then, the more interesting bits that set Pillars 2 apart is that it attempts to abandon the Tolkien setting for one less rooted in ancient Nordic mythology than modern colonial mythology. Tales of captains, conquistadors, and colonies inform a playfully pirate-themed setting, with swords and wands sharing space with pistols and black powder. The laugh-out-loud comedy is still there, if not more lavishly provided by the Deadfire's most foul-mouthed sea dogs. But the interesting alt-history bend that this medieval fantasy version of a pirate fantasy Caribbean takes is that unlike our own world, the native inhabitants of this archipelago have an established and powerful naval empire of their own by the time the colonizing started to happen. So for the natives, the contradictions of expanding their tribal customs and their communal sharing economy to imperial scale fuels a lot of interesting moments of accidental culture shock and convoluted infighting. So you got interesting quests to do for the native royal family, funny quests for the pirates, morally dubious quests for the trading company, and they add up to an eventual allegiance to somebody. The conflicting interests that make up Deadfire's menagerie of political, criminal, and commercial powers solidifies Deadfire as a New Vegas kind of Obsidian game. Almost formulaic, in fact. As the story develops, you'll have to play the sides, and you can't get along with everybody. You are very steered into signing on to Privateer for all of the 5 major factions as you follow their side quests into converging choke points. Who gets what kind of authority over certain Deadfire settlements affects the ending, you know how it goes. And yet somehow, as ambitious and romantic and fully featured as this all is, the Pillars brand comes out feeling a little cheapened. Pirate-themed games are still fairly uncommon, but still something people want to try to do right, but it feels disingenuous in this case because Pillars didn't need a gimmick. Its selling point is that it was pure quality. But Pillars 2 may still easily be the best pirate-themed RPG made yet, and if you ever wanted to see just how far the little-loved genre of pirate games go, then do check this one out, but be warned. People wanting to go into it for a swashbuckling experience are still gonna get hit by a wall of swords and sorcery. They're in for a story whose first act is something that I cannot rightfully claim as pure quality, all the while featuring the technological imperfections that have permanently stained Obsidian's reputation. Yeah, for once in my 60 hours here, the enemies were shaking all crazy for a little while. Just once, in one place, out of 60 hours, the Fog of War wouldn't update here. And yeah, I spotted this bridge that's supposed to be down, but it's not. I don't know, sometimes the interface was buggy, but overall it was tolerable. It was easy to put up with. Your mileage may vary, but come on, I can handle harder bugs than this. Meanwhile, the voice acting budget seems to have endured some cheapening too.
I am burning, and it is not in pleasure, not for Mother Margaret.
Excuse me, I did not just spend 60 hours learning all this nonsense so you can Margaret all over it. This is tolerable. Because the actual RPG systems in there, the stuff underneath, is damn good stuff. It's so much easier to rag on about the negatives, but as far as filling out all the bases of great RPG gameplay go, even a less perfect Pillars is still just doing everything right, really. And by doing everything right, I mean that we got a role-playing system here that narrows character development into specific playstyles and story consequences that make for impressively unique playthroughs. We got balanced combat and thick dialogue checks that make combat play fundamentally different per class, if not avoided altogether thanks to a surprisingly fleshed out stealth system, frequent opportunities to speech check your way out of it, or just by finding a key or solving a reading comprehension puzzle. Those who didn't like how spammy the first game's dungeons were with enemy placement have been sated somewhat. Though combat is still unavoidable, it is more diligently placed and paced this time. They had less of a trigger finger when it comes to copy-pasting these mobs all over the levels. And you can even use abilities and exploit companions to roll a technically pacifist hero who will technically have no kills to their name so long as animals or animents or whatever do the killing. And sure enough, even the most seemingly important quest givers sitting high and mighty on their thrones are not above the constant and lawful rule that characters die at 0 HP. That's all to be expected, but there's still a lot new here. There are at least rudimentary systems covering everything you can imagine that flesh out the seafaring fantasy of going all hands ahoy with your fellow freebooters till 3 rounds of volleys send them peeping up the strike color. Sorry. You will manage a ship. You will customize it. You will arm it with cannons you find by yourself out in the wild, and you will fill it up with a crew of named NPCs with personalities you find in the wild who will roll stats during battles of their own, because you will also engage in thrilling one-on-one naval combat, which is plainly gimped by this text-only budget, but hey, half the fun is using your imagination. You can be a lawless pirate, a lawful privateer, or just run some trade routes, or just rush the main quest, I don't know. After you're let off the leash of some of a 5-hour tutorial, you can just go. You can explore tribal islands, uncharted islands, deserted islands, find buried treasure, take everything as treasure anyways because you have unlimited inventory, sail through storms, manage your crew's grog and grub gobbing, have a spooky encounter with a ghost ship. And what else? What else but getting your men 3 sheets to the wind and sending us some sea shanty? Sorry. This ocean is hiding between 40 to 70 hours of questing fun for the taking, all bound together by a now classic subgenre of pause-and-play RPG combat, whose refinement made the first game so easy to like. But the particularly correct, almost puzzle solution combination of weapons plus abilities can KO just about anything in 3 to 5 hits. The fragility of your fighters on the field, and the complexity of combinations of weapons and abilities that you'll need to time and combine into a team-wide effort makes for encounters that feel like they could play out 100 different ways each time. And they're tensed with by-the-milliseconds timing where decisive game-changing moves can happen instantly, and regular interrupts and disengagements are vital. It always feels like you can never quite micromanage your team enough, and I can tell it's good because losing is fun. Pillar's combat still brilliantly rides that line between turn-based dice-rolling, math-scribbling RPG combat with spatial tactics and logical puzzle solving. Only problem is that for the majority of the game, I was able to get by without ever really having to think strategically about it. Either I've gotten good by now, or the second game's difficulty is tuned quite a bit easier than the first, and I'd recommend returning fans to bump it up 1 notch at least. One big change that I'm not so sure I'm keen on is that magic spells now recharge per encounter rather than per rest, which overpowers your wizards. I spent a lot of time exhausting all the biggest spells for every fight because there's no real reason not to. And I spent little to no time actually hitting that rest button to regularly refill what would have been a diminishing resource, implying the fragility and humanity of your characters, I guess. So the combat's still impressing me, but just like with the story, stakes are lower, tensions are lower, everything's a bit easier and thoughtless now, despite how complex the game's guts really are. But it's still good, it is still so good, it's just that last time I remember the combat being always good, and this time the fights towards the second half of the sequel were challenging enough to get me as sucked in as the fights halfway through the beginning of the previous game. And also what I recommend, I don't know why this isn't more publicized, but shift-click or control-click to add or remove your selections, shift-click in the world to queue up actions for the future, and control plus number buttons to assign party members to specific groups. This makes it possible to split the gang up and look for clues across a map, both saving you time and adding a layer of predictive planning, for when a lone party member risks stumbling into an event they're not prepared for. All things considered, this is a perfectly fine RPG video game. Don't know if I want to call it a masterpiece like the first one. I don't know if anyone out there really needs to play Pillars 2 in their life, but they still did it. They did it again! I may have more to complain at this one. It feels especially ridiculous that you can fast travel directly to individual rooms on the other side of a town and you can't fast travel back out, but oh my god, those first few hours were such a chore to climb over, but once I got in the groove, it was a right jolly to haul your galley's wind and hoist the mizzen into the war.
Way haul away, we'll haul away and go. To me! Way haul away, the good ship now is rolling. Way haul away, we'll haul away and go.
Young Gathbin sought the Yenward's crown long past the